The morning it happened, Grace Obi was happy. The way she had walked into that hospital with both hands resting on the full curve of her belly and a song stuck in her head, humming it under her breath in the elevator. She was 8 months along. She had stopped bracing months ago. She had let herself by the small things, then the big ones. The crib was already built. The yellow blanket was folded over the railing. There were tiny socks in a drawer she took out some nights, just to hold. She had a name picked. She had started talking to the baby on her drive home, quietly, in Igbo, the way her own mother used to. She was so close. Everyone kept saying it. So close now. She walked into that appointment glowing, right there in the corridor. The polished floor of Seoul General, the same hospital where she had once read a different report alone. Grace Obi went down to her knees like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. No sound at first. Just her hand reaching for a wall that wasn't close enough. Then a sound she didn't recognize as her own. And Shin Hyun-jae, who had been pacing that corridor, crossed it in 4 steps and caught her before she hit the ground. He didn't ask what was the matter. He could see something was wrong. It was written on the face of every person who came out of that room behind her. He went down with her, right there on the floor, pulled her into him and held her while she came apart, his hand in her hair, his other arm locked around her back like he could physically hold the pieces of her together if he just pressed hard enough. He didn't say a word. There were no words. He just held her, on the floor of a hospital, in front of strangers who looked away, and let her break. Grace Obi, who had spent her whole life being fine, was not fine. And the worst part, the part she would carry for a long time after, was the thought that arrived even then. Even in the middle of it. I knew this would happen. I should never have let myself want it. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. In today's episode, we bring you silent pain, true love, beating impossible odds, worlds collision, and romance. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on new story drops. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far these amazing stories have traveled. Now hold on to your seats as we take a deep dive into this amazing story. A year before that corridor, Grace Obi had everything. She had married Shin Hyun-jae in the spring. A small wedding. Her mother had flown in from Lagos and taught him Igbo phrases and declared him acceptable. Ji-yeon had cried through the whole thing and denied it afterward. For the first time in her adult life, Grace had stopped sleeping braced for the next bad thing. She had peace. She had not known she was allowed to have peace. And then, 11 months in, against everything her own medical file had promised her, she fell pregnant. She had read that file 100 times. Asherman's syndrome. Intrauterine scarring. The chances of carrying a pregnancy to term low. Significantly low. She knew the numbers the way she knew her own name. She had built a marriage on the quiet assumption that this would never happen for her. That she won't get to carry her own children. Then one morning, one test, one line that should not have been there. After weeks of uneven feelings and scattered emotions, she remembered Hyun-jae's face when she told him. All that control, gone in a single second. He had pulled her into his chest and held her like she was made of glass, and she had felt his heartbeat going fast and unguarded against her cheek. For the first time in her life, Grace let herself want something out loud. The pregnancy was high risk from the first week. The doctors said it plainly. The scarring made everything harder, the things a body is supposed to do, without being asked. They watched her closely. Hyun-jae came to every appointment, learned the names of things no husband should have to learn. For 8 months, she believed. She let herself believe. And belief, it turned out, was the most expensive thing Grace Obi had ever bought. The pregnancy had been careful from the start. Every appointment, every scan, every blood draw they asked for. Grace did not miss a single one. She was a doctor. She knew what her own body was up against, knew the word high risk was not a formality in her file, but a warning written in her own scarring. So she did everything right. And for 8 months, doing everything right was enough. The scans were good. The baby was growing. There was a heartbeat every time. That small, impossible drum that made Hyun-jae go still and quiet in a way she had never seen from him anywhere else. He would sit beside her in the dark of the ultrasound room and listen to it like it was the only sound in the world. He was different in those months. Softer. He stopped traveling for work. He started coming home earlier than he ever had. One night she found him in the half-finished nursery at 2 in the morning, just standing there, looking at the empty crib. After he had single-handedly built it overnight, without help from the people whose job is to make tasks like this disappear. "What are you doing?" she had said from the doorway. "Practicing." She laughed. He didn't find it funny. He was a man who had spent his whole life preparing for threats. And for the first time, the thing he was preparing for was something he wanted instead of something he feared. Grace let herself have it. All of it. Then came the 8-month appointment. It started like every other one. The waiting room. The familiar nurse. Hyunjae beside her with his hand over hers, scrolling something on his phone with his free thumb, completely at ease. The scan took longer than usual. She noticed before he did. She was a doctor. She watched the technician's face change. That small professional flattening that doctors learn to do when something is wrong and they are not allowed to say it yet. She watched the woman measure something twice. Then a third time. "I'm going to get the doctor," she said in a hurry. And Grace, lying on that table with cold gel on her stomach and her husband's hand in hers, felt the bottom of her stomach drop out of the world. She could sense it. Before anyone said anything, she knew something was terribly wrong. The doctor came. Then another. They used careful words. Grace heard about half of them. Her own body was failing under the weight of the pregnancy. The scarring, the thing that had been waiting inside her since she was 21, finally doing what the report had warned it might. The placenta, the blood flow, words she had read in textbooks and never once imagined hearing about herself. They had to act fast, to try to save them both. Hyunjae's hand tightened around hers. "Whatever you need to do," he told them. His voice was steady. His hand was not. "Whatever she needs." They took her in within the hour. She would not remember most of it afterward. The mind protects what it can. She would remember fragments. The cold of the operating room. A nurse's voice telling her to breathe. Hyunjae's face above the mask, closer than they should have allowed him, his forehead almost touching hers, telling her she was strong, telling her to hold on, telling her things she could no longer hear over the sound of her own heart. She would remember the silence. That was the thing she would never be able to explain to anyone who had not lived it. The silence in a room that was supposed to be filled with sound. The waiting. The held breath of every person in that room. And then nothing. No cry. No small, impossible drum. Nothing. Her daughter was born on a gray afternoon in late autumn, and she was perfect, and she was still. They let Grace hold her. She was small. Smaller than Grace had imagined through all those months of imagining. She had a full head of dark hair. She had her father's mouth. Grace held her and looked at her and memorized every part of her in the few minutes the world allowed, because she understood, even then, that these were the only minutes she would ever get. She did not cry. That was the thing that frightened the nurses. She did not cry. She held her daughter, and she was very, very quiet. It was Hyunjae who broke. This man. This still, controlled, dangerous man who had buried a mother and raised a sister and built an empire and never once let the world see him bend. He sat down in that hospital room, and he put his face in his hands, and he wept. And Grace, who had just lost her child, found herself reaching for her husband instead. Grief does not move in a straight line. Grace knew this clinically. She had said it to patients' families in her steadiest voice, in 2 languages. She knew the stages, the literature, the words. Knowing it did not help. They went home to a house that had been built for 3. The crib was still in the nursery. The yellow blanket was still folded over the railing. Nobody had thought to move any of it because nobody had imagined they would need to. Hyunjae closed the door to that room on the first night home and did not open it again. He took 2 weeks away from everything. Grace had never seen him take 2 days. He stayed. He cooked things she didn't eat. He sat with her in silences that lasted hours. When she woke at 3 in the morning, he was always already awake, as if he had decided that she would never again open her eyes in the dark and find herself alone in it. He was so steady it broke her heart, because she could see what it cost him. She could see the thing he was holding down every time he passed that closed door. He had lost a daughter too, and he was spending everything he had carrying her, with no one left over to carry him. "You're allowed to grieve too," she told him one night. "I am grieving," he replied. "You're managing me." He was quiet for a moment. It's the same thing. You're what I have left. That was the night he first said the things she wasn't ready to hear. Not pushing. Never pushing. Just laying it down gently, the way he laid everything down. When you're ready. Not now. Not for a long time. But when you're ready, there are other ways to build a family, Grace. Adoption. There are children already here who need exactly what we have to give. And the doctors haven't closed every door. We have time. We have options. I need you to know that the future isn't gone. It's just different than we thought. She heard him. She did. Some buried part of her even reached toward the words. But what she said was, I can't think about that right now. I know. You don't have to. I just needed you to know I'm not going anywhere. She went back to work the first chance she got. Back to her old habit of occupying herself, so she doesn't have to dwell in it. It was too early for her to be working. Everyone said so. Her supervisor said so, gently. Hyunjae said so, more gently still. He asked her more than once to take real time, to go home to Lagos, to let her mother hold her the way only a mother can, to rest somewhere that didn't have a closed door at the end of the hall. In case it'll help, he could host a burial for their daughter. But Grace Obi had spent her whole life learning one survival skill above all others. Keep moving. Keep working. If you stop, you feel it. So she went back. The white coat. The rounds. The bottomless supply of other people's emergencies to bury herself inside. At the hospital, she was Dr. Obi again, competent, composed, fine. At the hospital, nobody looked at her with that careful, pitying softness. At the hospital, she could be a person who had not lost anything. It was the only place that didn't hurt. So she gave it everything. Doubles. Extra shifts. The cases nobody else wanted. And at home, slowly, something began to fray. Not the love. The love held. But Grace started coming home later. Started filling every silence with motion, so she would never have to sit inside one. Started, without quite deciding to, building a wall again. The old familiar wall. Brick by careful brick. The one she had spent her whole life perfecting. Hyunjae watched her do it. He knew that wall. He had spent a year taking it down. He didn't fight her. He just refused to leave. It was Ji-yeon who tried. Ji-yeon, who had cried at the wedding and denied it, who felt everything at full volume and had never once in her life learned to hide it. She came by constantly. She brought food. She brought movies. She tried to make Grace laugh the way she used to. And she cried. Constantly. About everything. Ji-yeon could not say her niece's name without her eyes filling. For a while it grated on Grace, this girl who wept so easily, when Grace herself could not seem to weep at all. It felt almost unfair. How dare she cry so freely over a grief that belonged to Grace's body? Until one evening Ji-yeon stopped trying to cheer her up. She just sat down on the kitchen floor beside Grace, leaned her head on her shoulder, and stayed quietly. Without trying to fix anything. I'm not trying to make you feel better, Ji-yeon said. I just didn't want you to be on the floor by yourself. And something in Grace, something that had been locked since a gray afternoon in late autumn, cracked, just slightly. Just enough to let a little of the light back in. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Grace went straight back to that hospital instead of going home to her mother. She buried her grief in other people's emergencies because sitting still meant feeling it. Tell me honestly, can you blame her? Do you think Grace was wrong to run back to work instead of letting herself grieve? Do you think Hyunjae should have pushed harder to make her rest? Or was he right to just stay and wait? Do you think she was protecting him by building that wall back up or pushing him away? And if you had lost what she lost, would you let someone carry you? Or would you carry it alone the way Grace always has? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story is reaching somewhere tender in you, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet, because the next part is where everything turns, and you do not want to miss it. It happened on a Thursday morning few months later. A double shift, bleeding into a third. Grace had been on her feet for 19 hours. She hadn't eaten since morning. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Not real sleep, the kind that repairs you. She had been running on. Motion. Function. The refusal to stop. She was mid-sentence with a colleague when the corridor tilted. She remembered reaching for the wall. The same gesture from a year of grief. The hand reaching for something to hold. She remembered the floor coming up to meet her. Then nothing. She woke in a hospital bed. Her own hospital. The irony was not lost on her. Even half-conscious. Dr. Obi, admitted to her own ward. A colleague was standing over her. A woman from obstetrics named Dr. Han, holding a chart, wearing an expression Grace could not immediately read. You collapsed, Dr. Han said. Exhaustion. Dehydration. You haven't been taking care of yourself. Grace closed her eyes. I'm fine. I just need. Grace. Dr. Han set the chart down. You're pregnant. The room went very still. That's not possible, Grace said. Automatically. The way you say a thing you have built your whole life around believing. It's about 7 weeks, Dr. Han said gently. I ran it twice because I knew you'd say that. Grace lay in that bed and did not move, did not speak. Something was happening in her chest that she did not have a word for, and it was not joy. It was the opposite of joy. It was terror, because the last time, she had stood in a corridor 8 months pregnant and happy, and she had walked out of an appointment on her knees. She had held a perfect, still daughter in a cold room. She had watched the strongest man she had ever known weep into his hands. And she had promised herself one thing. I will never be the reason that man weeps again. Does my husband know? Grace asked. You only just came in. Do you want me to call him? No. It came out fast. Too fast. Dr. Han looked at her. No. Grace said again, quieter. Don't tell him. Don't tell anyone. Please. I need to think. She did not tell him. She went home that night, and Hyunjae took one look at the bandage on her hand from the floor and went pale, and she told him she had fainted from exhaustion, which was true. She let him fuss. She let him put her to bed. She let him hold her. And she lay awake in his arms with a secret living inside her body, and she said nothing. This is the part that is hard to explain to anyone who has not been broken the specific way Grace had been broken. She was not hiding it because she didn't love him. She was hiding it because she loved him. She had watched hope nearly destroy that man once. She had seen what it did to him. The nursery he wouldn't enter. The door he wouldn't open. She could not hand him that hope again, and then stand by and watch her own body take it back. She could not survive being the reason for that face a second time. So she made a decision that made sense only inside her own grief. If she lost this one too, he would never have to know it existed. He would never have to grieve a thing he didn't know he had. She would carry the loss the way she carried everything, alone. And if, by some impossible mercy, this one held, then she would tell him when it was safe, when the danger had passed, when she could hand him a future instead of a gamble. So she waited. Week 8, week 9, every cramp a small death, every appointment taken in secret, on her lunch breaks, under her own name buried in her own hospital system where no one would think to look. She watched her own scans alone in dark rooms the way she had once watched them with his hand in hers. Week 12. The danger zone, she had carried the first one well past, but she had read the literature on her own condition. She knew the scarring made every week a question. She told herself she would tell him at 12. Then she didn't. Then 16. Then she didn't. Because telling him made it real. And real things could be taken away. It was the morning sickness that nearly gave her away. 16 weeks in, hunched over the bathroom sink at 6 in the morning, she didn't hear the door open. She turned and Hyunjae was standing there, watching her, his face unreadable. How long? He said quietly. Not a question. How long have you been sick in the mornings, Grace? And Grace Obi caught, exhausted, for months pregnant with a secret she had carried completely alone, looked at her husband and felt the walls she had spent her whole life building finally, completely, give way. She told him everything right there on the bathroom floor. She hadn't planned to. She had planned 100 careful versions of this conversation, and none of them were this. Sitting on cold tile at 6 in the morning, still in yesterday's clothes, the words coming out of her in pieces. 7 weeks. The collapse. Dr. Han. The secret appointments. The nights she lay in his arms and said nothing. All of it. She told him she had hidden it to protect him. She told him she could not watch hope break him twice. He listened the way he always listened. Completely. Without interrupting. And when she finished, when she finally ran out of confession and sat there waiting for the anger, the hurt, the you lied to me she had earned, He pulled her into his chest. You carried this alone, again. His voice was not angry. It was wrecked. For 4 months. You were terrified for 4 months, and you let me think it was exhaustion. I didn't want you to hope, she whispered. I couldn't be the reason you. Grace. He took her face in his hands, the same way he had in that kitchen 2 years and 1 lifetime ago. You don't protect me by disappearing. I would rather hope with you and lose with you than be kept safe outside of your life. Do you understand me? Whatever happens, we are not doing it in separate rooms again. We do it together, strong or broken, win or lose, baby or not. She broke. And this time, when she broke, he did not have to hold her up alone. This time she let him in. The pregnancy stayed high risk to the very end. Everyone knew it. The doctors used careful words. There were more appointments than the last time, more monitoring, more nights Grace lay still and counted movements and tried not to remember a gray afternoon in autumn. But this time, she did not carry it alone. Hyunjae came to every appointment. He stopped traveling again. He sat in every dark scan room with her hand in his, and when the technician moved the wand and the room filled with sound, he went still in that way only she had ever seen. Then the technician paused. Hold on, she said. Moved the wand. Measured something. Moved it again. Grace's whole body went cold. She knew that pause. She had lived inside that pause once before, and it had ended on her knees in a corridor. What? She said. What is it? Tell me. What's wrong? Almost bursting into tears again as she turned to look at Hyunjae holding her hands. In her mind, she whispered, not again. The technician turned the screen toward them. There are 2 heartbeats. Dr. Obi, it's twins. Grace stopped breathing. 2 hearts, fast and impossible and real, filling a dark room with a sound her body was never supposed to be able to make. After Pros. After Asherman's. After a report that said low, significantly low. After a still daughter and a closed nursery door and 4 months of carrying a secret alone. 2. She turned to look at her husband. Shin Hyunjae, who had buried a mother, raised a sister, built an empire, and never once in his life let the world see him bend, was staring at that screen with tears running openly down his face and making no attempt at all to stop them. 2, he said, like he was learning a new word. Grace. There are 2. They were born in the spring. A scheduled delivery. Careful. A room full of people whose only job was to make sure this time the sound came. And it came. It came twice. The first cry split the air at 6:14 in the morning, furious, full-throated, alive. A son. And before Grace could even finish sobbing at the sound of it, the second arrived, smaller, just as loud, just as alive. A daughter. 2 cries in a room that had been silent the last time. They cleaned them. They checked them. They said the words Grace had not been allowed to hear before. Healthy, strong, good weight, breathing well. And then they placed them, one and then the other, into her arms. Grace Obi looked down at her children. Her children. The ones her body had spent her whole life telling her she would never hold. The ones the report had ruled out in clinical, unforgiving language. The ones she had hoped for in secret, alone. In the dark, too afraid to say out loud. They were warm. They were heavy. They were furious and perfect, and here. She did not say she was fine. For the first time in her entire life, Grace Obi did not reach for that word. She did not need it. There was nothing to manage, nothing to survive, nothing to hold back. She held her son and her daughter against her chest, and she wept, openly, fully, the way she had never once let herself weep, and it was not grief. It was the opposite of grief. The door opened. Hyunjae came in slowly, the way you enter somewhere sacred. He had been just outside. He crossed the room and looked down at the 3 of them, his wife, his son, his daughter, and Grace watched that careful, controlled, dangerous man simply stop. Stop performing. Stop guarding. Stop everything. He sat on the edge of the bed and put one arm around all of them at once and pressed his forehead to Grace's temple and stayed there, breathing, like a man who had finally arrived somewhere after a very long time lost. You held on, he whispered. We held on. She corrected him with a smile on her face as she cradled her twins. Ji-yeon arrived an hour later. She came through the door already crying. Of course she did. She had never in her life learned to hold anything in, clutching two impossibly small stuffed rabbits and apologizing for crying and crying harder because of it. She took one look at the babies in her brother's arms and put her hand over her mouth. "They're here," she said. "They're really here. They're here," Grace replied with joy. Ji-yeon sat down on the floor beside the bed, the same way she had once sat on a kitchen floor so that Grace would not have to break alone, and she reached up and held one tiny hand between her fingers, and for once she did not say anything at all. The four of them, and the two new ones. A family that had been built the long way. Through a corridor and a folded report and one word said in a kitchen. Through a still afternoon in autumn and a door that stayed closed. Through 4 months of a secret carried alone and a wall that finally, fully came down. Grace Obi had spent her whole life being fine. She had finally stopped. And in the stopping, in the breaking, the hoping, the letting herself be held, she had found the one thing being fine had never once given her. She had found her way home. Her family was finally complete, against all odds. Some stories end where the pain does. This one didn't. Grace lost something no mother should ever lose, and then she learned the hardest thing of all. That hiding from the people who love you doesn't protect them. It only makes you carry the weight alone. She put the weight down, and her arms were finally free to hold what came next. So tell me, do you think Grace was wrong to hide the second pregnancy, or do you understand exactly why she did it? Have you ever protected someone by keeping a pain to yourself? And would you do it again? And when Hyunjae said we are not doing it in separate rooms again, did that heal something in you too? Drop it all in the comments. This space belongs to you, and I read every word. If this story moved something in you, like it, subscribe, and turn your notifications on. New stories drop every week, and every single one is built for people who feel things all the way down. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the long way home is still the way home. We'll see you in the next one.